Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
10 minutes before 8 is the time. Let's bring into the conversation now Mark Harper, who is Transport Secretary and a Conservative MP. And while we have some weighty matters to discuss, Mr. Harper, noting that you were both former Chief Whip and chaired the COVID recovery group, your reaction to your former colleague, Matt Hancock, going into the jungle. Good morning.
Good morning. Well, look, I think my position is very clear. I think the first priority of a Member of Parliament is to serve their constituents, both in the constituency and in Parliament. And the Chief Whip has decided that going on I'm a celebrity for a long period of time is not compatible with that, which is why he's taken the whip away from Mr. Hancock. And I'm very happy to support the Chief Whip's decision. I think former Chief Whips ought to back up decisions that Chief Whips make. So I don't really have any more to add to that. I think my primary focus as an MP is serving my constituents and doing my job, and that's what I think all my colleagues should do. And they will have looked at the Chief Whip's decision, and I think they will draw the appropriate conclusions.
Final word on this. It's a classic misjudgment, isn't it, Mr. Harper?
Well, look, I think members of Parliament should focus on, doing their job, serving their constituents. That's our first priority. I think we can draw a conclusion from the fact that the whip's been taken away that perhaps Mr. Hancock hasn't made the right judgment in this case.
Let's move to other matters. You also, of course, served as Immigration Minister some years ago. There's a report that ministers believe the Modern Slavery Act needs to be reformed as part of a package of legislation to tackle the migrant crisis. A and 1, is that true? B and 2, if it is, what impact would that have? Good morning. Good. If you could explain that in a little more better detail. It's not particularly well written in the paper on that one.
Well, look, on this general subject, it's clearly the number one priority for the Home Office at the moment, both for the Home Secretary and the Immigration Minister. And the Immigration Minister said that he's looking at radical measures to how we deal with this situation. And one of the challenges here is we have a lot of processes in place. So the Modern Slavery Act is an excellent piece of legislation to protect people trafficked to Britain, held in conditions of slavery and put to work in very unacceptable conditions. Obviously, what you have to do is to make sure that if you put those necessary protections in place, that they don't get abused by people. And one of the challenges, if you're Immigration Minister, is that the threat and the challenge evolves over time, and there are organised crime gangs that are doing the trafficking. They look at the situation and they try and get round the rules. So you have to constantly be looking at the rules in place, the legislation in place, and evolving the legislation to deal with the threat. And I'm sure that's what the Immigration Minister is going to do. And obviously he'll review that and then set out his conclusions in due course.
Why have successive Home Secretaries and other members of the government failed so spectacularly as regards the migrant crisis? The Conservatives have been in power in one way or another for 12 years.
Well, look, as I said, I think it's because the threat evolves. When I was Immigration Minister, which you referred to, yes, people crossing into the country illegally did so in the backs of trucks and on Eurostar. We put in place tough controls, and we've almost eliminated that route for getting into Britain illegally. So, of course, the organised crime gangs, these are thoroughly unpleasant people. They don't care about any of the people they traffic into the country. They then look at where they can exploit a weakness. And that's where the small boats issue comes from. What we need to do is look at our partnership working with France. We need to step that up. That's why it was welcome the Prime Minister in his introductory conversation last week with the President of France. They touched on this issue, and we need to step up our cooperation with our counterparts in France. And we need to look at what more we need to do, whether it's legislation or operational matters. And I know this is the top priority for the Home Office, and the Home Secretary made it clear in her statement in the House of Commons this week that she understands how concerned people will be, and she knows what a priority is to get a grip of the situation.
Secretary of State, this is the first conversation we've had since you took on the transport brief. You won't be surprised to hear that many of my listeners have concerns about the so-called smart motorways. You've probably had sight also of a report that last week they were unexpected issues that left them out of service for more than 200 miles for much of the country for roughly 9 hours. Are you a fan of smart motorways?
Well, look, I've looked very carefully at the concerns that people have got and the very comprehensive report that the Transport Select Committee did. And you'll know my predecessor, but one, paused rolling out any new smart motorways until the department could gather evidence over a significant period of time about their operation about their safety record, so that we could then make some decisions in the light of all of that evidence. And that position remains the case. That evidence will be gathered, and then we'll be able to make decisions in due course about whether or not we roll out any more of these motorways. But that we're not rolling out any more at the moment, and we're collecting evidence from those that already exist. And I think that's a very sensible position.
But as you're talking, people might still be using those motorways, and there was a potentially catastrophic failure. What measures will be taken to ensure that whatever went wrong, whatever glitch occurred, would not occur again?
Well, clearly National Highways will look at what happened in the systems last week. They will take the appropriate steps to deal with that, and I know they're working on making sure that situation doesn't happen again. And that evidence and that set of events will obviously feed into the evidence base for decisions that ministers take in the future.
Is there any light you can shed on other matters? Any light you can shed on what we might be experiencing? We hear that there could be some tax increases on the way. We all know that there's a multi-billion-pound financial black hole that has to be filled. What might we be hearing later this month?
Well, look, you're obviously referring to the autumn statement, which is due on the 17th of November. So across government, there are obviously going to be some very difficult decisions that are going to be taken. Tax decisions will obviously be taken by the Chancellor in consultation with the Prime Minister. Secretaries of State across government like me are looking at our spending plans. We are going to have to make tough decisions, and it's important because we've got to set out a credible set of fiscal plans so that the markets have confidence. And why that's important is that will help bear down on inflation. Inflation remains the number one economic challenge, and that will also mean that interest rates will then be able to stay lower than they otherwise would, which is obviously very important for people listening to this show who have mortgages. So I expect a fiscally credible statement to be set out by the Chancellor, but obviously it wouldn't be right for me to speculate on the contents of that today.
Can you speculate on the front page of one of the newspapers today? The NHS wants an extra £7 billion to tackle backlogs. Are they going to get it?
Well, look, the NHS is a priority for the government. The Prime Minister's always said that we will put the NHS at the top of our list of priorities, and clearly that will be borne in mind when we're making these decisions. It wouldn't be right for me to speculate now on the exact settlement, but the NHS remains a priority for the Conservative Party and for the Prime Minister. It has been in the past, and it will continue to be in the future.
Last couple of questions, very much on your brief as Transport Secretary, Mr. Harper. On the weekend, your Cabinet colleague Michael Gove seemed to suggest regarding HS2 there's a possibility it could be scaled back. Is this an opportunity for the Treasury to save some cash?
Well, look, the government remains committed to delivering HS2 and the plans that we've set out on time and within the budget that we have allocated, and that remains the position. Clearly, we're
so Mr. Gove was wrong then. We're not looking to save some cash there.
Well, we clearly remain focused at all times on looking at how we can deliver those high-speed rail services in the most efficient way. I mean, your listeners would expect government to be focused on deploying public money in the most efficient way. So we always do that. And of course, in the light of the autumn statement, we're looking at all of the programmes that we've got. But the government remains committed to delivering HS2 on time and within the budgets that we've set out.
So we go ahead?
Yes, so
okay.
We remain committed to delivering HS2 on time and within the budgets that we've set out, and I've been being briefed on those plans over the last week since I've been in post.
Okay. The government's environmental watchdog has warned the proposed air pollution target to be met in 2040 should be met in 2030, otherwise lives could be lost. The government's missed its deadline of Monday to set the new post-Brexit environmental targets. Transport plays a huge part, of course, in this. How much of a priority is the environment for you in your brief as Secretary of State for Transport?
Well, the government and me personally remain very committed to making sure we think about the environment in everything we do. Our net zero commitments are important in my priority. Transport plays a big role in the environment, and it's one of the very important issues we focus on as we develop the future of transport, and we think about how we're going to have to change our transport systems to do two things, which is to focus on the environment, but also to make sure we have a transport system that enables people to get around the country and live their lives how they want, in a way that's consistent with our environmental protections.
People struggle to get around London, don't they? There's terrible air quality issues in London because of traffic congestion, surely.
Yes, so we have to make sure that we develop our transport systems in the future, whether it's the private car, whether it's public transport, to make sure we're continuously improving the environmental position, but also making sure that people can get around, get to work and live their lives as they want. And both of those things are important priorities for me and the Department for Transport.
Lastly, can we talk about another aspect of transport? That's the railways. There are more strikes on the way. Your predecessor, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, made a point of meeting one of the unions, or actually some of the unions, to try and resolve the strikes. What's your approach to the unions going to be to try and bring about some kind of settlement?
So it's very welcome that there's been some progress in the talks, and one of the unions has called off their strikes next week. That's very welcome. I think these situations are always better if they can be resolved around the negotiating table. I'm very happy to meet the trade unions. The negotiations are obviously going to take place between the unions and the employers, Network Rail and the train operating companies. But I think it's helpful for ministers to meet trade union leaders and to listen to their concerns, and I'm very happy to do that, and my department will be reaching out to those trade union leaders in due course.
And hopefully those meetings fairly soon then. Lastly, Mr. Harper?
Yeah, I'm planning to have those meetings, as I said, and I think it's helpful to listen to the concerns unions have got, but the negotiations will take place between the trade unions and the employers, so Network Rail and the train operating companies. I think that's the right way to conduct negotiations, but I'm always open to meeting people to listen to their concerns. Congratulations
on your appointment. I look forward to speaking to you more in the future. Thank you. Secretary of State for Transport Mark Harper appearing here on LBC. 1 minute after 8, Lottie Morley's got the news.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's